Both of the stories tonight belong to the Reddit user Ambitious8691. My computer is haunted. If you have a weak stomach, I'd advise you not to read through this, as I'm going to recall a pretty detailed and graphic memory. Now, I'm not the most tech-savvy individual out there, but I do know for sure that what happened tonight isn't due to an error or a glitch. For context, this all started around July. I'd come home from work at around 4:30 and I'd hop on my computer for an hour or so to briefly check some emails, among other things. I'm not on the computer much since I only use it for work purposes, but I still make sure to maintain the software and keep it updated. I've never had any problem with it before, until one particular evening when I came home a little bit later. I arrived home at around 6 that evening, and to my surprise, my computer was already on. I knew I hadn't left it on, but I made the assumption that it might have been from an update from the previous night. The weird business started becoming apparent once I'd hop onto it, though. It felt a lot slower, as if the computer was lagging due to something running in the background. I made sure nothing else was open besides my emails, and sure enough, it was just my emails. I carried on, but right before I hopped off, I noticed a text file on my desktop. I clicked on it and nothing happened. Waited for a while as I assumed it had to do with my computer's sluggishness, but it never opened, so I deleted it and turned off the computer. For a few days after this, everything seemed normal, albeit my computer was still running slightly slower, but nothing too troublesome to deal with. That was until I started noticing strange emails popping up in my inbox every few minutes from what seemed to be the same sender. None of them had a subject, only a date, which read 26th of March 2019. I didn't know what the date meant. It had no significance to me. Not a birthday, anniversary, or any other particular event I could think of. After a while, the constant emails started to get annoying, so I blocked the sender. Immediately after that, another email from an unknown sender came through, and the image I saw when I clicked on the file attached will forever be burnt in my brain. Graphical. A young girl who looked no older than her early teens, sliced almost in half and hanging from the ceiling by her large intestines, and the few nails that pinned her hands to two large pillars on either side of her body. Her bottom half was barely attached to her, only held together by what looked like some duct tape. I was horrified, but I couldn't look away. I was in a trance for a few seconds until a loud gargle and screech echoed from my computer, snapping me back into reality. I tried everything to stop the noise, but no matter what, it kept going. It seemed to get louder and louder, and I began to panic. I ran outside in pure fear and watched from my window as the computer screen started to get brighter. I could still hear the rapt gargling from outside. And as I continued looking in my house, I saw the computer start to flicker and flash. And emerging from the screen, I saw what looked like a hand. I ran straight down the driveway and hopped into my car, which I had parked on the curb, then drove all the way to the town's local church. Miraculously, I made it in time to find a priest, Father Angelo. I got out of my car and practically jumped at him to explain my situation, speaking so quickly I could barely understand myself. It's a miracle he could translate what I was saying. He took me inside the church and sat me down, then asked me to calmly re-explain the situation. I told him everything, and I watched his expression become somber the more I spoke. After I finished speaking, we both went quiet. We sat in silence for a moment before he sighed, then started to speak. I believe you have a demonic entity in your house. I don't know what you've done to summon it or how it has become attached to you, but whatever it is, we must stop it. If she's already made it this far, then. He stopped there, then got up and began walking to the door. I followed him, and we got into my car and drove back to my house. The second we arrived, unease washed over me. All the lights were now off, and we could no longer see in. The computer screen was off as well, but the front door was still open as I left it. I was as nervous as one could imagine, but I followed the priest inside as he led the way with his candle and holy cross. The house was so still, it was almost sickening. We walked to the office, where it was still the same as I'd left it. No signs of disruption or an entity anywhere. I looked to my left to see Father Angelo, the expression on his face remaining composed. Suddenly there was a loud crash behind us, and I whipped my head around to see nothing but darkness. The computer, which was now behind me, lit up again, with the garbling and screeching practically stunning me. I covered my ears and looked back at Father Angelo, who was now holding his cross up to the screen and shouting something in Latin. From the screen emerged a hand again, this time followed by a decaying head and half a torso. I fell back and watched as Father Angelo continued to shout. The lights in my house were now flashing and buzzing, and the floor beneath me felt like it was going to crumble apart. Father Angelo screamed out, no longer chanting Latin, but instead begging to the creature. "Please stop this," he shouted. "I'm so sorry. I never should have left you there. I'm sorry." The screeching got louder, and just when I thought it was the end for us, Father Angelo reached into his pocket and grabbed a vial of holy water. He doused the creature as well as my computer in it, and the creature let out an unholy cry before disintegrating and vanishing. Father Angelo didn't hesitate to douse my house in the holy water shortly after. He slumped to the floor, huffing and puffing. His face was sweating and his eyes watering. I didn't dare to ask questions. After a few moments, we both got up and I thanked him. He left, and I called my brother and asked if I could stay with him for a few nights to recollect myself. Since that happened, I found a new place and moved far from where it all happened. I burned all my life belongings in that office before I left and bought myself a new computer. I never heard from or saw Father Angelo again, and for a few months everything seemed to be okay. But tonight on the news they reported the death of a well-known and beloved priest, Father Angelo, who died at age 57 of seemingly natural causes. The report went on to say that he was buried in the same cemetery that honored his late wife and daughter, who both died in March of 2009. When the date flashed across my screen, a chill ran down my spine. I've been feeling uneasy, and I know I won't be able to sleep well. My mind is racing, hundreds of thoughts rushing through at the same time. It's now 11 p.m. as I've finished typing this, and I've been distracted again by the dim light and low hum of my computer in the other room. The end. And our second story is My New Dog Won't Stop Howling. All my life, I've really loved dogs. Growing up, my family never had one, but I had plenty of cousins who did, and whenever I'd go over, I'd prefer to hang out with the pooches. Now I'm 23, and I've just moved into my own place. I figured living in an apartment by myself would get lonely, so I got myself a dog. A small black border collie I could tell that would eventually grow up to take care of her owner. I live on the first floor of my apartment complex, so I have access to the front and back car parks as a somewhat yard to let my dog out if it gets too overwhelming inside. I've had her for a few weeks, and she's normally a well behaved pup, but recently she's been whimpering and scratching at the door late at night. I usually try to take her out for a walk before it gets dark, but ever since the weird behavior started, she refuses to come along. Instead, when I call her name with the leash in my hand, she just sits and stares out the window facing the car park. Since I was a big fan of dogs growing up, I guess I expected I'd know what to do in any situation, but this one stumped me. I've started taking her out to the back car park for a few minutes whenever she would start whimpering, where she'd run around and eventually usually tire herself out. That was until 4 nights ago. On a particular night when she started whimpering and scratching, I went to let her out. But as soon as we reached the building's back door, she froze. She just sat in front of it, staring out into the dimly lit lot. "Come on, Annie," I repeated, but she didn't move a muscle. I went to close the door, but right before I shut it completely, she started growling. It wasn't like any other growl I've heard from her before. It was a low, guttural, almost predatory one that sent chills down my spine. She kept growling at the door, even after I'd pulled it completely shut. I didn't know what to do. She never behaved this way before, and it was creeping me out. She wouldn't follow me when I tried to take her back inside, and I couldn't just drag her back into my flat, so I tried the door again. I opened it, and that's when she started howling. Her howl sounded almost painful, and I knew it wouldn't be too long before the ruckus would start to wake up the neighbors. I tried to calm her down, but to no avail, and sure enough, I soon saw the floor manager came into sight. "Ma'am, could you please take the dog outside?" he asked through gritted teeth. I forced a smile and nodded before walking her outside. She was still howling, but at least now we were far enough from the building where my neighbors hopefully wouldn't hate me too much. "Annie, Annie, please relax," I sighed. She wasn't going to stop. That's when she started to yank against her leash. I gripped it tightly, but her little legs moved faster and faster. I looked up towards the direction she was trying to run in, and that's when I caught a glimpse of it. Beneath the flickering luminescence of one of the lot's light, a long, black figure stood. From where I was standing, it almost looked as though it was slanted backwards, as if it was only a shadow with no one in front of it. The light above continued to flicker, and Annie's howls grew louder and louder. A loud smash stopped Annie's howling, as the flickering light suddenly burst. Shards of glass scattered across the floor of the lot, and I immediately tried to run back to the building, but Annie didn't follow. She sat in the same spot, seemingly frozen again. Above us, more of the lot's lights started to flicker, then burst. With every flicker, I would catch another glimpse of the figure moving closer and closer as the lights created a runway for it towards us. It only moved in the darkness, and it seemed like it was stopped by the light. But its speed gradually increased as the lights continued to break. I realized my time was running out and I had to make a choice. I let go of Annie's leash and ran as fast as I could back to the complex. Behind me, the sound of the glass smashing continued. I was almost at the door when I heard the most terrifying noise imaginable. I'm not sure whether it was Annie or that creature, but whatever it was, it sounded painful. It sounded like it was being torn limb from limb, with a metallic roar accompanying it. I made it to the door of the complex and practically threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut behind me. Outside, I heard nothing but silence. I bit my lip and walked back to my apartment, my entire body shaking. I leaned against my door for a few seconds before I heard a knock. From the other side of the door, I heard my neighbor asking me if everything was okay. When I opened the door, she gave me a worried look, and in her hands was Annie, who looked shaken up but seemingly happy to see me. I nodded and thanked her, and she left Annie at my feet before walking off. Annie barked and hugged my leg, and I couldn't find it within myself to pet her. It looked like my dog, barked like my dog, but it could not have been my dog, not my Annie. It noticed my fear and sniffed me, and I tensed up, but I didn't make a noise. It licked my hand, then went and laid in Annie's bed. It's been 4 days since all that happened, and tonight I'm wearing earplugs to bed. I don't want to listen to that howling again tonight, and I especially don't want to listen to the horrifying noises that come after it. Some nights, the screams that follow are short, but they never stop sounding painful. And now they've started sounding human. The end. It might have been from an update from the previous night. The weird birds. Bleh. Bishish. The weird business. I ran straight down the driveway. Straight down the driveway. Miraculously. Miraculously. That honored his late wife and daughter, who both died in March of 2009. When the date flashed across my screen, wow, a screen. Now I have a screen, apparently. This has been Gray Stories. I hope you liked